So welcome to the node.js Diagnostic Working Group meeting for today. Peter couldn't make it and he asked either myself or Jarish to chair. It seems like Jarish hasn't been able to get in, so I'll chair the meeting for today. Let's take a look at, we'll follow our standard agenda, which was in the issue number 351. And to start out with, does anybody have any announcements or other information that they'd like to share?
I have a short status update on the async hooks execution async resource stuff we can add to the agenda.
Okay, I think we have an issue which is 124 stable API tracking issue. Maybe we can do it under that one if that works for you.
Yeah, that's kind of connected to that.
Sounds good. I just pasted in the chat the link to the minutes where people can add themselves in as attendees as well. Okay, so if there's no other announcements, then let's move on to the agenda. So the first thing that was tagged was report version number 349. Semantics are not defined. So this is one where I guess there's questions about the version numbering in the report functionality. Do anybody have any thoughts, comments they want to add? The discussion is kind of around what we currently have as a single version number, but it's not clear how that version number, like when you should bump that version number, what it means. I know when I looked at it, it was like, yeah, you might rely on the major version being the version for Node, but that means that if there's a new version of Node that doesn't change the report at all, you don't know if you need to make an update to your parsing of the report or not.
So not really familiar with the feature, but the version is specific for the structure of the report. That's what we want to make version of.
Yeah, in the the diagnostic report writes either to console or to a file JSON formatted diagnostic data, and it includes a version number, which today is a single integer. And the PR was like, hey, it's not clear if is it when we're adding features it needs to be bumped, or since it's only, if it was Sember, I think people would understand, like Sember minor, you bump the minor, major, if you're making a breaking change, you bump the major. Given that it's just a single number, it's not necessarily obvious what it should mean.
We can probably check what Docker does for Docker files. I think they don't use any Sember versioning, that they only have a single number for that, and it actually works for them to keep people on the loop on what changed between versions. So I think we can probably see it of cases.
So you're talking about the Docker compose file format?
Yes, I think it is that you said, at the beginning of the file, you said version 2 or version 3. And that means that it is going to recognize certain fields on the file.
I'm just looking at, I did a quick Google. They seem to have 2 digits. Like I see 1.0 goes 1.0, 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3.4, 3.0, 3.1, and so forth. What I don't know yet is, because I haven't had to read what does each digit mean. Let's see what is, maybe I'm just reading some more what that does mean.
my personal feeling is that like, to be safe, as long as it remains one number, it should be like any change at all bumps it, because integers are free. But if we switch to semver, then yeah, we can split up the meanings. But the switch to semver should, I think, probably be a major bump of node itself.
A major
So,
bump of, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that I could see being major. That's true.
the report feature is experimental at the moment, so
Yes.
we can break it until it comes out of experimental.
That's true.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we have things in experimental.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it will be breaking. I mean, for the version of the, I mean, for me, the real case will be having a parser for the file or for the data that the report retrieves. If we have a parser, I mean that would be my idea. I will have a parser for that data, and if at some point we have to push a new type of data that the parser cannot recognize and probably breaks, I'll consider that a major bump or something like that, or something that, I mean, if you are going to use some server or something like that, that will be one of my ideas to actually decide when to bump a version in a SEM server, because if it's just on personal preference, everyone is going to have a personal preference of what really is a version bump. So I would rely to swap to a parser or something that can actually give us an idea of how people are using the data that the report is sending, and we can actually see if that any change or any different structure, any different any different data that is going to be sent or needs reprocessing, or it needs that the parser that, for example, we do to do checks requires a different a bigger change to actually understand the data that is being sent. That's my opinion, my personal opinion.
I'm just trying to help Therese join, unfortunately. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now I can promote him. I think. Trying. Just seems slow, maybe. Okay. I'm just reading through, like, some of the comments are in the issue as well around whether semver actually applies.
Michael, you have just sent a message to the panelists, but not the attendees. So,
Okay. Well, I think Jarish should be in now, right? Can you hear us, Jarish?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
You're a bit choppy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but choppy.
My network is absolutely crazy. So probably it's my visibility in the meeting is absolutely poor.
You might try typing in the chat, since we can't, you seem to be coming through fairly slowly.
Is there anything better?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I blame it on the poor interaction. Yeah, I guess you were discussing on the semantic versioning schema for the report. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yes. Do you want to dive in, jump in there?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure I heard all the opinions, but my way of thinking is like this. Generally, we talk about semantic versioning on a software piece of code, more specifically where you have more than one type of feature implementation, which essentially have implications on the existing code. So the semantic version perfectly makes sense over the major version, minor version, and patching. Whereas with respect to the diagnostic report, we are essentially talking about piece of data. There is absolutely no code that is being shipped, which has implications to the existing code. So what is the implication of the report, which is a piece of data, a collection of diagnostic information, how that implies to the existing consumers? The answer is mostly for the tooling owners. For other than that, it's just the question is more information versus less information. There is nothing called breaking information. The breakage comes only for the tooling owners. That's my perspective.
Right. Like there can be two types of changes, I think. One, which is addition of new information, which the tools, like an existing tool could continue to work because it's JSON and just do nothing with, and probably doesn't require any code, right, changes. And then there's changes which would change the format such that the tool would no longer work on it without doing something different.
I agree. Yeah, the structural changes that causes breakage to the tool that has static assumption about the way the report layout is the only problem. For the actual consumers who really take the data, I mean, the chances of the vital information missing in a diagnostic context, where exactly one piece of information was missing, is going to be very, very rare. For example, the thread ID of a specific environment was the most vital information in a specific problem determination context. And because of the specific version which was in use, that ID was missing. I think it's going to be a rare combination. In most of the cases, the diagnostic report provides more than sufficient number of information. Only a subset of information is really going to be used for a specific diagnostic case. So that way, I don't see any requirement of semantic versioning being relevant over there. And these questions arises, right? Like, what do we do for patch? What exactly mean by patch in this diagnostic report context? So a simple digit, which basically bumps the number whenever there is a structural change uh, by which the tooling has to be rewritten about the assumptions about the layout of the report, makes perfect sense to me.
Right. So versus because the other suggestion was that it be bumped for any change.
I don't think. I mean, I don't think it should be the case to bump
Right.
for every case. I mean, that's part of my idea is for the diagnostic side, we should just have a tool that consumes this report and just keep an eye on how that report change, and the tools that could probably consume this report are going to be affected. I think that what we want to need to keep in mind most of the time is just that it's how that information is going to be used, and if a change happens, if whatever tool is consuming that data is going to have an impact on what is going to be using that data for, and I think that's I mean we can just define criteria. For example, if a new type, I mean, if it's a JSON, if the data now is in array instead of a JSON or something like that, or instead of an object or something like that, we can decide if that criteria means that for example, the tool and that any tool that can be using this could probably break, and we can decide if that criteria could mean that we should bump that version of the report. I think it's just that defining criteria that we think will impact in someone else using the data.
Right. Well, one thought I had is like, say you've added some new fields. A tool may need to say, okay, if I'm using, a report that has those fields in it, I want to do this. If it doesn't have those fields, I want to do something differently. So I could see potentially wanting to check the version number and say, okay, I'm version 5, therefore I can actually show this data. Oh, I'm version 4. Sorry, that's not available, so I'm not gonna show it or process that. If we had a single number, how would we handle that case?
I think maybe we can think about all the cases, and for this case we can actually say, for example, has Docker, they have 2 digits, so we will say that every time we add a new field, we just bump the first digit, so it will be 1.1, 1.2, or something like that, and it is a specific per digit. The first digit, it will be bumped every time new data or less data is in the report. And maybe if the data change when the parser or whatever is consuming the data, it will bump the major version of the report. I mean, for this, I think it's a matter of thinking all the possible cases to actually figure out numbers that work for us for the diagnostic report. I think that's probably the best thing to do. Is just think on all the possible situations and think and see what could make sense on any of that, and at the end just think on, hey, let's keep in mind those reports or those situations and try versioning in this way. I think that's probably the best way. I mean, right now at this moment we don't have someone using this report, so it's going to be way more difficult to actually understand how this is going to be used later. So all of the cases are going to be mostly hypothetical.
So with respect to the possibility that Michael proposed, that is some of the fields or some of the data is missing in the report, the tools are already taking care of that, is my opinion. For example, the libuv, the current report itself, not necessarily based on the version of the report, but based on the actual handles and the artifact sitting in the event loop, it's so possible that in a specific deployment, the libuv data can be completely empty versus libuv section is fully populated. And the same is the case with call stack. It's in certain scenarios such as out of memory error, the call stack is going to be completely empty. So my bottom line is that the tool is already taking care of that based on the internal layout of the report.
Okay, so it's that there's no guarantee you're going to get a particular field. So the reports and tooling should be written to say if it's there, great. If it's not worried about it.
Right, and probably nobody's taking notice about that because, as I said in the previous conversation, if you are exposing hundreds of information in a specific problem site, not all the 100 pieces of information are going to be critical. So there are elements which are probably missing, but it's not being taken notice of.
Yeah, I think if that, like, for me, if we explain that, we don't think we need to tell the tool, if we think we can say that the tooling doesn't need to know when there's something been added because it needs to be flexible anyway. And the single digit is just going to be to inform breaking changes, then the single digit would make sense for me.
Yeah, the single digit increment is essentially telling the tools to say that the current way of consuming the report is probably worth investigating. There are changes the way the report is generated, so need a modification. It's a possibility. It might not be because of the kind of changes that happened. Depends on the way the tooling is implemented. It's so possible that it requires a change. It may not require a change.
Right, if it's not using the field in the first place, then it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. For example, if a tool is writing a JSON parser to completely consume the report and then looking at it reflexively as opposed to based on static assumptions, nothing is going to break ever as long as the report is a fully qualified JSON object.
Right.
Because ultimately the tool is not the end consumer. It's just an intermediary between the real operator and the report. So a reflexive way of just translating the data into a different view or different representation. I'm not saying that tooling should be written in that way, but that's also one form of the tooling use case. So in that case, all what we are saying is this digit increment represents there is a potential change that is required for the tooling to look at the report structure.
So here, I'm just going to see there was a comment just a minute ago in the issue by one Chris Hiller, who is one of the tooling writers. So let's see.
Originally, the report did not have a version number, and it was Chris who requested one as he wrote the tool in the report. He asked for a version number, but when we added the version number, it wasn't as now well defined as to what that version number meant. So that's where this issue has come from, is that as we've added things to the report, the question then has arisen, now that we have a version number, when do we actually bump it up? Because it's not clear to people, developers in core, and that version is really there for the tooling consumers. Chris being one of them who said it would be handy.
I'm just asking Chris about the proposal to have a single number that's bumped only on breaking changes.
What is our precedence with the way we handle V8 version string within the core as well as an API? I guess we maintain some version strings for a couple of internal modules.
Right. So an API, we only have a single number, but it's specifically non-breaking. So no NAPI change should be breaking in terms of Semver.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically bump the NAPI version every time we add new methods, but it's strictly additive. So therefore that single number tells you the when basically equivalent to Semver minor, but and nothing else applies. In the case of V8, we basically bump that every time we bring in a new version of V8.
Irrespective of whether it is going to cause any ripple effects in the consumer.
I
We
that's the case. I actually have to check to be sure.
if you're referring to the module version that we bump every time we put a new version of V8 in, once we release a major of Node, that gets fixed, and we can only bump the version of V8 in a release as long as we maintain binary compatibility, which means that version, the module version, doesn't change. We do not change the module version for V8 for add-ons in a release line ever.
Okay.
So we only will when we take if it's Semver major, we effectively bump it. I think is what Richard just said.
Mm.
Correct.
Right. So. It sounds like I was just chatting with Chris. He didn't just say a single number that's major only makes sense to him. Because I guess checking like the checking to see if a field exists or not did seem to be a potential issue. The other people have comments. My take is we may need to take this back to GitHub to continue. I mean, I think Jarish, the suggestion you made, you could suggest that. Just talking with Chris, though, it sounds like there'd still be discussion about whether we need the other number, because he's preferring if it would be bumped on every change.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He did just say that's fine. Proves too difficult, you can change it later. So maybe if you want to put in your, what you suggested, the rationale, and then that may let people comment specifically on that. I mean, certainly I can. It makes sense to me if we say that it's only the Semver major that makes sense, and the minor the tooling has to deal with. And if we have consensus from tooling, the people who are going to writing the tooling, then makes sense to me. But we can see what everybody else thinks in the issue as well.
Sure, I'll make a note on this in the issue.
Okay. Okay, let's see what was next on the agenda. Just gonna take a few notes. Lots of discussion. Pros, cons of numbers. Okay. So next thing is the proposal to drive diagnostic work group initiatives through user journeys. I'll mention that I did write a section on debugging with using debugging memory issues with Valgrind. Let me just find that issue and I'll paste it in there. And then I'm going to, once that lands, I'm going to link that into the work that we've been doing. Jarish, do you have things you want to add as well?
Yeah, I was trying to complete the crash documentation. I should confess that I did not get enough time on completing that. It's right now on first phase completed out of 3 phases, and 2 more phases need to be done. And I believe a couple of other contributions came in the last couple of weeks, one from Mateus on memory diagnostics, I believe, and another one on V8 profiler. It's still in the review phase. I request participants to have a review on that and see if any contributions or suggestions that can be made to help land that to fill all the gaps.
Okay, and I think next time we were going to do a deep dive into memory investigation, right? Are still there?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we're doing next time is the deep dive on, I think, investigating debugging memory problems.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I pasted the link in the chat. It's 31501. Could use some more reviews or at least approvals to get it so that the debugging with Valgrind could land. Anything else on that issue we should talk about before we move on?
I'm just trying to also find out the PR that's outstanding in the diagnostic repo.
Yep.
I think it's 343.
Okay, that's this one here. I'll just paste it into the chat.
Yeah. So please review that as well.
Okay, put that in the minutes. Okay, any other comments, issues, discussion on that one before we move on?
Not from me.
Okay, so the next issue on the agenda is stable API tracking issue, async hooks. I think, Stefan, do you want to give an update on the async hook side there?
Yeah. So there's an issue on the TSC repo, an executive summary for trying to get a continuation local storage of some sort into Node. So there's kind of like two proposal PRs. One's called async storage, the other's called async local. They both do roughly the same thing, but one exposes a map while the other just is a container for an arbitrary value. But so far seems to have come to the consensus that we either one that we choose will want to rebase it to use the execution async resource PR when that lands, which that is mostly ready, but we found a bug in it the other day that it's not properly taking into account reusable handles that have like a separate resource, like async resource object to represent the reuse. So I need to make an update to make it recognize that properly. And then once it handles the like reusable things properly, then it should be ready to execution async resource should be ready to land, and then we can start looking at which of the two PRs we want to rebase on that and land.
I think last time I thought async execution resource was blocked on some sort of performance issues or something. Have you resolved those?
Yeah, there was some performance issues before because like I was just like at every time like doing a direct call back and forth, and now it's just interacting with an array.
Okay.
So that there's like a back array that pushes and pops the resources in. So that's quite a bit faster and was pretty close to on par with what the performance was before adding it.
Okay.
So yeah, it works right now, just other than the reusable resources need a small fix.
Okay. Okay, no, that's good news because I thought that one might have been a bit harder, but it's good that you've got an approach that's good.
Yeah, that's all out of the way. So I should get to fixing the reusable resources thing hopefully this weekend. I'm traveling right now, so I'll be busy until like Sunday.
Okay. In terms of the two proposals, is there anything worth digging in or discussing here with this group in terms of like the differences or?
Yeah, I can kind of summarize them. So there's async storage is the like more closely mirrors the continuation local storage module in userland, which basically just gives you an object that you can stuff data into, and it propagates that object through the async tree. Whereas async local is just a container. So it itself does not actually allocate a separate object or anything. It just you give it a value that it should use as its thing to pass around, and then you can get that value out of it later. So async local is maybe slightly better performance, but not, I don't think either have really been properly performance tested to actually see what the performance is. Part of that is that async local currently is built on top of the execution async resource PR. I'm not sure how up to date it is. Yeah, it's built on top of that, whereas async storage was built in separately, so it doesn't depend on execution async resource currently, but it also has like potential memory leak. Just in like once it switches to execution async resource, it should eliminate that. But just the way it's designed right now, it can potentially leak in certain scenarios. So it's more just practical demo of like the API surface than anything at the moment.
Right.
But yeah, we should look at the two and like consider the like API ergonomics side of it right now in terms of like performance comparison. I don't think that's really something we can do quite yet.
Right. Yeah, I guess from the API side, is it familiarity, or is it that one's like a higher level and being higher level is less risk of being something that, you know, we want to change later on? Or is there anything like on that aspect that helps push in one direction or another?
Yeah, so async local is a bit lower level. So it doesn't have any opinion of what the object should be that it's passing around. It's just a container. Async storage could technically be implemented on top of async local. Async storage is the higher level module, but there's kind of mixed opinions on like, do we want higher level or more like medium level kind of API? Because like to some extent the purpose of having like async storage inside of Node is that like things like APM vendors and like web frameworks and things like that can have this shared format for kind of storing and communicating data. Many of us are somewhat of the opinion that this data should not be like directly accessible between two things. Like if say Express used a continuation local storage inside of itself for storing its own contextual information, and an APM probably shouldn't have direct access to that because it might interfere with it. But having like two separate ones, like a communication channel between them, might be good. But yeah.
Yeah, it did seem like there's fairly good consensus that there should really be a separate context or local for each thing that was using it, right? Because you don't know what the other people are doing and when to clear it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's easy to, yeah. In the case of async storage, it has like an internal map that you could easily call like map.clear on and totally mess up whatever other thing is depending on it.
Right.
With async local, it's a bit safer because it's just a container of a value. So like you could mess up, you could like erase the entire container if you wanted, I guess. But hopefully you shouldn't have direct access to that. So yeah, like my personal opinion is that like async storage or async local, whatever we land on, should be like it should be used by like one primary user. Like each use case should have its own context management. But if we want to communicate data around like what is actually happening, then like we should have a separate like more event channel type thing to communicate the actual like contextual metadata around things. Like we did have like diagnostics channel proposal,
yeah,
like a long while back that I unfortunately have not had time to do much of anything with. But I'd kind of like to revive that at some point and have that as like the way to actually like cover the like linking part between like if a like web framework wants to communicate routing information to an APM or something, you can just expose like here's my diagnostics channel, just listen to this, things like that.
Yep, that makes sense to me. So I think like that one doesn't seem to me to the sticking point. The sticking point is more around higher level. Well, something, you know, in one case is maybe a little higher level and familiar to existing CLS users, and in the other case it's a little lower level. You know, I don't think the overhead of an extra map or not really makes a huge difference, but it's a little simpler, and so it's kind of like, what is it? Yeah, how do we figure out whether the higher level one, like maybe it makes sense because we wanted to make it higher level than async hooks, so that it would be less likely to change. But I don't know that async local has that problem. Like it seems pretty straightforward as well.
Async storage is kind of modeled fairly closely after the existing continuation local storage. So that has familiarity if you're familiar with that. Async local is modeled more after thread local in Java and other languages.
Yeah.
So like if you're coming from that direction, then that's going to be more familiar. So the familiarity case is a little bit debatable.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So I guess it's still a fair amount of discussion to figure out which one we make sense. As any other key sort of things that are worth mentioning to this? Like, does anybody else in the group here have any thoughts on, you know, why we might, you know, push things in the direction of one versus the other, or? No, I guess if not, just continue the discussion in the issue itself. There's, you know, it's been many people been chiming in with good information, good summaries and stuff like that. We'll just have to continue to discuss to figure out which way we end up going.
Okay. And to some extent, I don't want to encourage people to dig too much into it right now. Just I feel like until execution async resource lands, and the PRs are rebased on top of that, I think until then it might get a bit bike shady.
Okay,
so
and if that's happening, you said in the next week or so, it's not a problem to wait for a bit of time.
Yeah, like we don't have any actual like performance data for either of the PRs yet, so we kind of need to get to that before we can, I think, make a more informed discussion about which one's better choice.
Yeah, it sounds good. I was concerned that the performance issue was going to take longer, be harder, whatever, but since that's not the case, it sounds like I think you said it was like you're within a week of getting the other one landed, hopefully, or?
Yeah, hopefully. I'll probably try to get back to fixing the final issue on Sunday, and then ideally sometime next week it would be ready to land.
Yeah, regardless of like specifics, it's relatively soon, so it's not a problem to wait until that gets rebased. So that's good. Okay, anything else you want to give an update on the async hooks front, or?
Nothing else at the moment.
Okay, I think that gets us to the end of the agenda. So unless there's something else that people think we should talk about, we can close out for today. Okay, thanks. Talk to everybody later.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.